Okay, I'm a biologist officer, enforcement in Pretoria. I'm responsible for administrative and criminal enforcement for AIS. Okay. My presentation outline goes as follows: the legislative framework, background of AIS regulation, offenses, enforcement tools, penalties, case study, and the conclusion. Okay, it all starts with the Constitution. Section 24 of the Constitution, which says that everyone has a right to the environment that is healthy, and to the environment that is healthy, to their well-being, and to have the environment protected through legislative measures. And then the number emanated from the Constitution, and then came the Biodiversity Act 10 of 2004, which is what we are enforcing. And then with the AIS regulation, okay, this one, the AIS regulation became into effect in October 2014. And we were hired actually in 2015. We have been in this for about 6 years. So in our section, it consists of 4 officials which are issuing these notices and everything. We issuing the notices to all the provinces, to all the provinces. So this is for plants. And then in another section for animals, we have 4 officials which are responsible for all the 9 provinces. So maybe that's why sometimes people are saying we're not issuing notices for other properties or what. And it's because there's a lot of properties and we're only responsible for those, for all the provinces. And as enforcement, we can only act on what we have received from compliance. As Tian was also talking about that, he is also responsible for all the provinces. You find that in one province he's got 1 official, so sometimes you cannot cover the whole province within a year or within 6 months or whatever. And I would like to stress the point of that question that I have received, that we do give people time to comply with our legislation. As we have mentioned, I have mentioned that these things, they involve money. We get a lot of complaints from the landowners telling us that we do not have money. You know, you find that maybe the landowner will say, this thing is going to cost me 1 million. How am I going to raise 1 million within a year? That is why we sometimes accept the control plans which have been drafted for like maybe 7 years, 6 years, or 5 years. And then we can only act on the control plan if the person is not following what he has submitted to us. And I know as people from maybe other departments not working with the Alliance, you might not know what the story is about. Okay. Okay, enforcement. Okay, the NEMBA and the AIS regulation is enforced by the EMIs, which are also commonly known as green scorpions. We also a network of enforcement officials from various spheres of government. We have EMIs in our national department. We have EMIs in the provincial departments. We also have EMIs in the municipalities. The EMIs, we work closely with the SAPS in investigating in environmental crimes. Not just the AIS ones. We have different. We have different environmental crimes. Okay, what are the functions of the EMIs? We monitor and enforce compliance with specific national environmental legislation. In this regard, I enforce the NEMBA and the AIS regulations. We also investigate an act or omission in respect of which there is a reasonable suspicion that it may constitute an offense in terms of such a law or breach of such a law. Okay. We have criminal investigation powers in terms of section 31H5 of NEMA, whereby we are regarded as peace officers or police officials not commissioned in terms of chapter 2, 5, 7, and 8 of NEMA or of Criminal Procedure Act. To comply with our mandate in terms of section 31G and within the area of jurisdiction for which we have been designated. And all the grade 1, 2, 5, and 5 EMIs, we have the powers, the same powers of as peace officers or police officials which are not commissioned to arrest. We can arrest you. We have the powers to seize. We have the powers to search properties. We also have the powers to issue the admission of guilt fines. Okay, compliance and enforcement. It consists of three things, which is the inspection, the administrative enforcement, and the criminal enforcement. Okay, what gives the EMS powers to inspect? We can inspect in terms of section 31K of NEMA to ascertain compliance, whereby the section 31K, it says that an environmental management inspector in terms of section 31G, within his or her mandate, can at any reasonable time inspect a property, and they can also enter any property, a premise, a building, without a search warrant at any given time. And we can also search any vehicle, any aircraft, any box, any bag or an item for a purpose of ascertaining compliance. So, yes, so when we come to your property, you should know that it is legislated in NEMA. And then administrative enforcement, we issue warning letters. We can also issue compliance notices in terms of section 31L of NEMA, which says that an environmental management inspector, in terms of his mandate, within his mandate or her mandate, in terms of section 31G, can issue a compliance notice. And then that compliance notice must be in a prescribed form and follow a prescribed procedure. We don't just issue. Okay, and then also we have regulation 15 providing that directive in terms of section 69(2) and section 73, subsection 3 of NEMA, of which I will explain in the next slide. I will explain section 69, subsection 2 and 73, subsection 3 for issuing directive in the next slide. Okay, the criminal enforcement, we open criminal case dockets with the SAPS, and then we register, the registered dockets are handed over to the NPA for a decision, and then finally the docket goes to court. Okay, offenses. The offences in terms of section 101 of NIMBA, which read, a person is guilty of an offence if that person contravenes or fails to comply with the provisions of section 65, subsection 1, section 67, subsection 1, or section 71, subsection 1. Section 65, subsection 1 talks about the alien species. We have the alien species, we have the prohibited species, we have the listed invasive species. So, section 65, it says that a person may not carry out any restricted activity involving a specimen of alien species without a permit being issued in terms of Chapter 7. So if you carry out any restricted activity without a permit, it's an offense. Goes together, it goes for section 71, subsection 1, which talks about the listed invasive species, is the same. No restricted activity without a permit. And then section 67, subsection 1, talks about the prohibited species, whereby they have to be published by the minister. If you carry any restricted activity of alien species, and that species is not, published, it's an offense, okay? And then contravenes or fails to comply with directive issued in terms of section 69, subsection 2, and section 73, subsection 3. Section 69, subsection 2, it talks about the alien species, and then it says that an irrelevant competent authority, which is the department, may issue a compliance notice if you fail to comply with section 65, subsection 1, which talks about the alien species. If you do not have, if you fail to comply with the permit conditions, we give you, you are authorized with a permit and you fail to comply with the permit conditions, it is an offense. And then section 73, subsection 3, it also says that a competent authority may in writing direct any person who fails to comply with section 73, subsection 1 and subsection 2, of which I would like to explain, whereby section 71, subsection 1 says that a person who fails to comply, who is authorized by a permit in terms of section 71, subsection 1, and then fails to comply with the permit conditions, it is an offense. And then you also fail to prevent or minimize harm to biodiversity, it is an offense. And section 73, subsection 2 says that a person who is the owner of the land whereby the listed invasive species occurs may, in writing, inform the relevant competent authority of such listed invasive species occurring in your land. It is your responsibility as a landowner to inform us about the occurrence of such species. And Stian was also talking about that in his presentation. And then also, you must also control and eradicate the listed invasive species in your property, and you must also take all the required steps to minimize or prevent harm to biodiversity caused by your actions as a landowner. If you also fail to, you contravene or fail to comply with the provisions of section 69, subsection 1 or section 73, subsection 1, of which I have explained, and you fraudulently alter any permit, you also make a false statement for the purpose of obtaining a permit, is an offense. You forge any document for the purpose of passing it as a permit, it's an offense. You carry a restricted activity without a permit, it's an offense. So penalties in terms of the Act, Section 102 of NIMBA state that a person convicted of an offense is liable to a fine not exceeding 10 million. Anything in between up to 10 million, and then also to imprisonment for a period not exceeding 10 years. Or both such a fine and such an imprisonment. I don't know if you understand that. Okay. We also have penalties in terms of the regulation, which is Regulation 36, subsection 2, and there's a lot of sections in there. I mean, I've just outlined them. If you open the regulation, our regulation 10003, you will find all of this. You can read all of this, but most of them, they are sometimes same as the ones from the legislation. So, but yeah, you are guilty of an offense and you are liable to a fine not exceeding 5 million rands. Or in case of in case of your second subsequent conviction, a fine of 10 million, or to imprisonment for a period not exceeding 10 years. Okay, the case study, I only included one of the state versus Mrs. Deloitte. This was in Emelo, and the inspections were conducted by our compliance inspectors, and then we issued an administrative notice, and then the landowner did not comply. I mean, the nursery owner was still selling. They were found selling different species, your category 1B, category 2, like your Muraya and the beef-food, and they were not in possession of permits. So they were issued with notices, and then it went criminal, and then a penalty, and then we entered into what we call a plea of admission of guilt fine. So the person was fined and sentenced to a fine of 3,000 rand. Actually, it was 15,000. So they were fined 3,000 rand, of which they had to pay, and then the 12,000 was suspended for a period of 3 years, meaning that if we find you selling the listed invasive species within these 3 years, this fine can be imposed, the 12,000 rand. Yes, okay. And then the other three we've had, it was the two convictions, we had 4 convictions. The 2 was for plants and the 2 was for animals. So for plants we had this one for nursery, and we also had another one for a property whereby a guy was fined 50,000 rand. And then for animals, we had a guy who was selling the common boa, and then when we went back again, he was selling a different species because he was issued with a notice. He was selling a different species, and then that's when we went criminal, and then he was fined about 20,000 rand, and then 10,000 rand was paid, and then the another 10,000 rand was suspended for a period of, I think it was 5 years. Yeah. So in conclusion, I'm saying that the alien and invasive plant species, I like talking about plants because I'm enforcing for plants. So alien and invasive plant species do not respect any boundaries, so the landowners must work together with the department. The alien and invasive species, they are very gorgeous, as you can see on the picture. I don't know if you know this plant. is the morning glory. We call it the morning glory. And then, yeah, but they have detrimental impacts on our natural species. So, our people, those who travel to overseas, they go there, they pick up some nice plants, they pick up the seeds and everything, and they come with them to our country, and then they plant them. They take over. They take over your land. They take over your indigenous vegetation. So please, when you travel and you see those, do not bring them here. Because if we see them in your property, we come in. So I'm done with the presentation. Thank you.
Well done. I finally got Brittah to stand in the box. Right, we have some questions. Stian?
Brittah, just thank you. Beautiful presentation. Just quickly, just advise our audience, after we've now given that fine for Mrs. Toy, what did we tell them to do with that plants here in the nursery? So people can understand from here, after we've given a fine, after we've going enforcement route, what is the landowner's responsibility with those plants or whatever it is on their property? I did write also a document on the transportation of biomass and invasive plants, but obviously, but in a legal way, to explain to them what is happening in the next step after that. Thanks.
Okay, so with the, after fine and everything, actually you have to, destroy the plants because you cannot sell them. But we don't advise you on how to destroy the plants. And then for category 2 plants, obviously you have to apply for a permit, and we will issue you with one if you, yeah.
Okay, thanks for a good talk. I'm rising up to comment on the destruction of the biomass. I did a study over North Cape and Free State, and it's not the Cape, Free State, Gauteng and Northwest. A lot of this biomass is being dumped. Like the state with the regenerates, and it's very much aggressive. If you cut a stem or cactus, let's say cactus, you drop it, it's able to regenerate and become a new plant and spread again. So I think the department has to emphasize or find a new strategy or also the criteria of destroying those plants. I've seen funny things out there. I've seen people trying to use diesel to try to burn cactus, and sometimes it's a failing effort. So we are only able, or we may be only able to stop them spreading by finding a proper way of, destroying the biomass. We spread, we throw it in the dumping site, it regenerates and spreads again, and the problem continues. We need that strategy, or we need that policy, or one way of guiding the society on how we should do that.
You know what I can say is that in enforcement, we do not tell you what to do with the biomass. The moment you draft your control plan and then you submit the control plan to us, we read the control plan. That's where you have to indicate how you are going to, discard your biomass. But we don't come up with those solutions. I'm so sorry to say that, but as a landowner, you have to find out how well you can destroy the plants and how to deal with the biomass. If we approve, it means that we saw that with whatever you are doing, there won't be any further spread, and then we work together going forward with the control plan submitted.
Thank you. Brittah, I wanted to know, you said you give private owners or property owners timeline in terms of controlling their basin. In terms of giving them a control plan of about 5 years to 7 years. So my question is, do you guys check the progress on their control plan? If someone has a 5-year plan, to control whatever they need to control their property, do you guys come after 1 year and check on the control plan? They said they're going to clear 10% of the property.
Yes.
And then if they're not doing what they said on the control plan, what is the step that you guys take after?
Obviously, we have to issue with the final notice, because you have to do, when you are submitting a control plan, you are committing yourself that this is what I'm going to do this year. Normally, the landowners, they divide their properties into sections. You find that maybe the landowner has got about 3 or 4 sections, and they will say that maybe from June to July, or maybe from June to December, I'm going to focus on this section. So I will be checking your control plan, and then when when December comes and you don't submit a progress report, you also have to submit progress reports in every commitment. If December comes and you submit your progress report or you don't, I come for a follow-up inspection. And if you are not doing what you have said you will be doing, I go to a final notice and then open a criminal case.
Does that answer the question, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any other? There we, lady in front. Ons gaan nou terugkom.
Thank you, it's Natalie again. I emphasize the previous speakers' concerns about guiding disposal. Landowners are not experts in this field. We cannot expect them to know how to dispose of the material properly. And I've parked my question about the cactuses for afterwards, but I'm going to say again what he said is, when dealing with cacti material, we living in the Northern Cape, the reality is most landowners don't have money to buy plants for their gardens. So what we having found is that there's alien invasive species in the gardens, and it's also they don't have water to plant any other plants. So if you don't tell them this is an alien invasive species, what substitutes do you give them, number one? And number two is, where do they dispose of it? Some areas there's not proper landfill sites that are serviced properly. So you need to have those plans and you need to give them guidance in terms of the local authorities. Our department is also limited. We have Christine that's working on the alien invasive species to a little bit of an extent, but we don't have an expert to help us guide in terms of saying to these landowners, this is how you need to dispose of it, and we really need to start thinking about that.
Okay, can I answer the question before you go further? In terms of the experts, I don't know if I'll be talking a lot from enforcement action. In our directive, we do indicate to the landowner that it is their responsibility to appoint a specialist. We do not have specialists, but there's a lot of specialists out there who deal with the listed invasive plant species. I know, yes, it involves money, but then there's nothing we can do in terms of the law. The law is the law and everyone has to comply. So we stress the point that you have to appoint your own specialist. You have to find someone who knows how better to deal with the plants. Again, you were talking about, is it the biomass? For the purpose of the presentation and not putting myself into any, we don't tell you what to do with the biomass. You have to tell us in your control plan, and then obviously when we read the control plan, that's when we will advise you. We won't approve it. We will advise you, send it back to you, and say no, this method is not going to work for your type of species. and then come up with another method, maybe advise, and then until, because as you said, it involves money, because different methods involves money. So you know, okay, I can have a budget for this.
Brittah?
Or not.
Mike is you. Mike.
Natalie, just hold on for 1 second.
Sorry. So the colleague was quite right, but also what is happening before it gets to enforcement action, we still with compliance. We try to guide you. Remember I said there's category 1B species and we've drafted guidelines. In the guidelines, we will actually advise you what control methods to use, aquatic sunbee, or how to dispose it. And also we have Debbie's there. Debbie's going to tell you exactly now on what to use, what hoggetjies to use, what herbicide to use. So there is ways. So that is to cover the plant section a little bit. But when it goes to enforcement, it's almost like we've stepped over the line now. Now we're really naughty. We can't turn around the clock. They're giving you a directive, which means now they're directing you what to do. But before it gets there, when you're still with me in compliance, I try to negotiate and see this and how can we make it better. But let's just park the plant section. With other types of groups, we, for example, have MOUs or understanding agreements with, for example, let me make an example, Johannesburg Zoo. If we take away a tiger or a lion or whatever is the state, we do have humane ways of euthanize it, or SPCA's involved. I mean, we also busy with a massive miller duck project in Cape Town where we have to eradicate miller ducks. But there's ways of doing it. There's ways of, we have facilities where we can actually house them for a while we're dealing with enforcement action. So I hope that answers your question a little bit on that section. I did, like I said, draft a guideline which has not been finalized by our legal team after translocation of biomass, meaning it doesn't help you cutting off all invasive species, putting it back into a puppy and go dump it at a dump site. Because now you're just spreading the problem. So I drafted the document that will still go through our legal team. Once that is approved, then it's up and running, use it as well. But I hope that's more or less
I think that answers the biomass in disposal problem.
Lady at the back has a question. Debbie?
Sorry, just to answer your question on the biomass. If you're looking at cacti, every cacti species that does not have a biocontrol agent we'll deal with separately. But every cactus species that's got a biocontrol agent, you don't have any biomass left. There is no biomass that you will have to remove because the cactus eats it, the biocontrol agent eats it all. So there is no issues with regards to how do I get rid of the biomass. Okay, because the biocontrol agent will remove the biomass. Okay, so, and that's why I always say all the biocontrol, all the cacti species under biocontrol will remove the biomass for you. Okay? If you're looking at invasive non-plant species, the biomass has to be exterminated or removed or, how can I say, transported to an extermination facility where it has to actually be a biohazard facility where it will be put into a incinerator. So that you're not going to have dead animals lying around. It will be incinerated in a biohazard facility. So there's going to be no animals lying around that have been poisoned or whatever. So that falls within the implementation part of the facility. So what the biosecurity people do, they take part with the legal process and then they hand it over to implementation, which is us, and we then write the how to get rid of the biomass process. And so all of that is taken into account. So it's a two-phase process, the legal process and then the implementation process, which will then deal with how you get rid of the biomass. But when it comes to cacti people, the national strategy says if it's under biological control, then you do not use herbicide on that species. The only herbicide that will be used is for any species that does not have biocontrol, and then we have specific herbicides that you will use on those species according to our EP pesticide policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. You see, it's very important for us to get the background on all angles. Okay, we have a question at the back of the hall. But you're not off the hook yet.
Hi, I would just like to know, how effective does the FFE found these fines to be? Because, especially when it comes to the fatal stuff, if a fine of 10,000 rand, but he gets 80,000 rand an animal, why would they stop doing that? All it makes them do is find a backward to do it in a more slinky way so the department doesn't find out. Can anything be done to increase these fines?
In terms of the fines, we don't come up with the value. As I said that we enter in all of the 4 cases that we had, we entered into a plea of guilt of fine. Then we see to the attorneys, they decide on how much they fine. And sometimes you find that the person, there's certain things that they consider. Sometimes they consider the age of the person. They consider that the person might not have the money to pay 80,000 rand. And then, so they come up with that decision. And then we cannot argue with them because we have to work together. And then, they are effective. Where we have fines, we do go back. As I said, that there's suspensions. Maybe they are suspended not to commit the same offense within 3 years or 5 years. So during the course of the years, we do go there to check if they are selling or they are not clearing or what. We do go back only to find out most of them, they still, all those 4, they still comply with the legislation.
Philip?
Yeah, Philip Ivey from the Centre for Biological Control, Rhodes University. Just, Debbie, with regards cactus control, as you know, only 15 of the 35 declared invasive species of cactus have got some sort of effective biological control on them in the country at the moment. I'll bring this up later when I present, but so an individual householder won't have access to a biological control for over 50% of the listed invasive cacti. And the problem for a householder, if they don't have a designated area where they can dump an invasive cactus, which they've been directed to remove from their property, is it will spread. And our colleague from Sanby has researched that. It's a little problematic that departments will review your control plan and have access to resources which will say your control plan is not appropriate. Why not give the advice up front so that the control plan is appropriate and provide a designated dump that will deal with invasive alien plant species, particularly cactus, which gets removed, if it gets removed from, say, a house just down the road from this church hall, and they can't dump it where it can be dealt with properly or monitored or poisoned on a site, we're just going to spread the problem because the householder doesn't have access to the facility to deal with a species of that nature. So I think we need to implement the law, but we need to provide the facility that landowners and householders can actually practice the law within the law when they're dealing with these species. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Any other questions with regards to AIS enforcement? Lady? Our Kimberlite?
Hi guys, my name is Jadine. I'm from Makhananesa in AIS. I actually just wanted to ask, you were saying that clearing your places and getting compliant with the law costs a lot of money. So to what extent can private companies actually sort of get involved with working for water kind of government projects that are already ongoing? Can't we just like put in an order and say, you're anyways going to clear, you can come to us as well? Is there an option to work with them, or do they already have their set projects that they only going to do those projects?
I'm going to ask Stian to answer that for you.
Okay, in regards to that, remember working for water, they plan way in advance the new inbound or properties for the future. So what's happening is, remember the legislation says that it's your as land a responsibility to make sure your land you are compliant. However, every single province do have a working for water office. You can apply for assistance. You can apply also for herbicide assistance still, or that's not. You can still apply for herbicide assistance. You can also apply to SAMBI for assistance. However, it's not, before they are going to approve any assistance, there is certain factors that will take into place. I mean, you can think now, so if there's problems, then they need to look at a certain extent to where the problems are. If it's the river stream, for example, we just cleaned the whole Berg River all the way from Wellington down to Kansu of all clearing of invasive species. And that's all a working for water project through private landowner properties. And I can tell you this, we do not spend a cent of taxpayers' money on state-owned land. Just keep some parts apart. We do not spend that working for the money on properties that belongs to the state and government. We spend that money on private land, putting back into private sector. But Debbie has some comment on that. Thank you.
But you can apply for biocontrol assistance for biocontrol agents through my office. So that is not according to a pre-planned MUCP on a monthly or on a yearly basis. Biocontrol is available all year round through my office. Thank you.